All right, I want to introduce Mike King. Before he came in earlier, we were talking, and I said, usually I do a little bio on the person coming in, and I don't really have a bio on Mike, and I said, so give me it in a nutshell. And he talked about his woodworking experiences, always around wood, always around wood, always around wood. We know Mike at the Historical Society back before COVID. Michael has been very passionate about understanding this topic and trying to understand this topic and digging in and researching. I said to him before we started, had Michael not done this, and his friend with the video, had they not gone out into the woods and put this together and done the research, you wouldn't be sitting here, we wouldn't be enriched by this. Where would that history be, right? It would be sitting with us in the Mark Dewey Research Center until somebody comes along and discovers it and wants to tell that story. So we're all about that, and thank goodness for Michael to get that going for us and help us to discover something that very few of us even know anything about. He has a real passion for this topic. He's a real curious guy. He shows up at our door almost on a weekly basis, Michael, on a weekly basis. So much to tell. So without further ado, I give you Michael.
Thank you.
Oh, geez, Louise. Well, I'm not a historian, nor do I play one on television. But I will say that my lifelong interaction with wood, after 25 years of living here, finally led me to stop over and see what this lime kiln thing was all about. I mean, here's this road, and And that was the hook. And so part of what triggered that is knowing that kilns are predominantly, or were predominantly, fired by wood. And I'm going, so in 2017, as a member of the Sheffield Historical Commission, we got interested in finding out what these lime kilns were about. And we commissioned Lynn and Beth Wood to do research on the subject because there was almost nothing available. And they did a spectacular job of creating a presentation where they found out who the main players were. They did chain of title for the entire lifespan of the kiln. And that, all of that work is over in that book that's on the table over there. And it's quite a treatise on the subject for somebody who wants to dive into this pool. What happened after that was that we tried to, because the property is owned by the National Park Service and the Appalachian Trail Conservancy, we tried to kind of, what are you guys going to do about this? And after about 8 months of pursuing that, we found that it wasn't going to go anywhere. So I said, well, we've got to do something to boost the interest in this, but we don't have any money. So basically on a $200 budget, I roped this guy in, and we ended up making a little movie, which will be part of the presentation, and you'll see it in its entirety a little later in the presentation. So that said, now let me back up and actually get to the subject at hand. Most of us from our secondary school education had some geography, we had some ancient history, and so I'm going to start with that. So limestone, how long has it been around? Well, as it turns out, limestone has been burnt or calcinated, as some scientists might like to refer to it, since, get this, the pre-pottery Neolithic B times. That's 8,000 to 10,000 BC. And the earliest use of it shows up in sculptures, pre-pottery, pre-pottery. So with that in mind, let's take it from there to a really easy, some easy images, historic images of the use of limestone as limestone. Sir. Okay, those, what are they? Pyramids, but where are they? They're at Giza. These are the 3 pyramids at Giza. The largest of those pyramids. Can you see that?
Yes.
You're the blindest guy here, so can you see that? Would you? We don't know how to operate the lights.
I can kill the lights.
Okay.
Would that help?
Okay, great. The largest pyramid in the center is 775 feet square. It's huge. It is composed of 2,300,000 rocks. Now, the reason that you see the top of it, and then you see that top, it starts to miss. It's like a snow cone. All the stone that was surrounding and encasing that pyramid was limestone. So the core of the pyramid was granite, but it was encased, iced over in limestone. Each one of those stones that were originally there in the casing were about the weight and size of, anybody drive a Subaru here?
Yeah.
That's your Subaru. Now take the wheels off it and try to move it. Okay.
Whoa.
Yeah. The engineering that was, we've all tried to speculate on the engineering that went into the construction of the pyramids. Equally daunting and mind-blowing, at least to me, is the engineering that went into the creation of the Roman aqueduct system. That aqueduct building system started at approximately 312 BC and lasted till about 260 AD. Most of you here are boomer age, so you still use those denominations for age. The shortest of these, there were several hundred of these aqueducts built, and these aqueduct systems, I should say. In Rome, 11 of them went into Rome, and they started as much as 35 miles outside of Rome. And in full swing, they supplied 200 gallons of water per day to each and every citizen. Now, to kind of give you a more modern context to work with, 30 years ago, it was felt and surveyed that the average American consumed 27 gallons of water per day. These Romans, of which there ended up being about 1 million in Rome, are at 200 gallons. And these aqueduct systems are only 20% of the system itself, because most of the system consisted of pipes that were underground, or if they were at ground level, they were covered. The Romans did not want debris in their water, and they also had cisterns that would occasionally drop the water into a cistern so that debris could precipitate out of it. These are constructed, the degree of accuracy and the building that was done here, from my reading, I'm still reeling. They are constructed closer to Rome in the Italian peninsula. They are of limestone, of a variety. And the limestone goes up, and then what they did was they would build basically a perimeter of limestone rocks, and in the center, they would stuff lime. Aha. What that says is that the presence of what is called lime, or burnt lime that has been reduced via heat to lime, was used to pack in the interiors of these things and cement them together. Now, what's missing in both of these pictures is, where's the wood? Being a woodworker and having a lifelong exposure to wood, I'm going, they had to build arches to support all those arches before they could even lay the stone. They had to hoist the stone up using cranes that were made out of wood. They had to put platforms that surrounded these piers every 6 or 8 feet. All that wood is gone. So, and then when you look at that big pyramid, you go, oh, stone, stone, stone. What's missing in that? Again, it's wood. The reason I'm bringing this wood thing up is that because that theme is a theme about energy, and it will percolate right into our modern thinking in the forms of how we deal with creating energy and what happens when we use it on a massive scale. So anyway, back to the pyramids. What's missing in the pyramids? Where are all the boats that brought the granite down the Nile from 80 miles away? And where are all the boats that brought the limestone in from 6 miles away? They're all gone. So again, the wood disappears, but the stone remains. Next picture, please. Aha! Oh. We all know what that is. That's the Colosseum. We've all seen various movies there that have depicted things that have happened with the gladiators and that. This is built, the columns are travertine marble, and they are put together, and the arches are cemented up with, again, limestone. Remember those 200 gallons of water coming into Rome per day? They had active latrines for people who came to these events. This thing seated from 50 to 80,000 people. And they had latrines, running water. There were seats with holes in them. But we won't go there. And just as a little side note, the first use of the Colosseum was for reenacting naval battles, so it was flooded. Okay? Now let's come up to modern times. Here's our American monument of note, and you'll see some notes on that that say, second note up says Sheffield marble. So over on Berkshire School Road, there was the Briggs Quarry. And they were hired or retained to provide one heck of a lot of the marble to build the Washington Monument, but it was the marble that they ended up sending was either too little, it was not sent on time, or it was not cut to the proper size. And so the Briggs Quarry got cut off. And that's why you only have that little section there. But I've gone from overseas, we're coming back to where we need to come to. So, Briggs Quarry, there were actively in the early 1800s to mid-1800s, there were something like 6, if not 7 quarries in Sheffield. And there were a couple of fabricating mills where they would take the stone from the quarries and they would cut it to fulfill orders up and down the East Coast and over into Boston area and so on. So one of those quarries, and now we're going to get closer to this, those of you from Egremont might be familiar with the name Goodale. Anyway, Chester Goodale was quite the businessman over in Egremont. He started out as a shoemaker and got into the limestone business and acquired a quarry that is actually the quarry that's, when you go past the Shays Rebellion Monument, that is a piece of stone from the Goodale Quarry that is basically a quarter of a mile further north. He lived for quite some time and quite a dedicated man. The report is that at the age of, I think it was 89, he was still traipsing around the Boston, New York area trying to do business for his quarry. And he had a fabrication mill just up the street where the Appalachian Trail comes down to meet Egremont Sheffield Crossroad now, just past Shays Rebellion. That was a little bit further on would be the location of that fabrication facility that is no longer with us. So next. Okay, I'm going to stop. Before I dive into the lime kilns, I'm going to further refine this wood thing because it becomes kind of an important factor in this story. How many of us here either heat with wood or have wood fireplaces or burn wood on a yearly basis? Yeah, well, a lot of old schoolers here. All right. So we know from personal experience what it means to order a cord of wood. Well, are the measurements on a full cord of wood. 4 feet wide, 4 feet high, and 8 feet long. Now, the one thing that you notice about this particular depiction is that each one of those pieces of wood is the full 4 feet in length. Okay. Now, let me, I'm going to mix things up here a little. I love to make life harder for myself. Wood, to burn wood, it goes through 3 combustion stages. We all know that water boils on our stove at 212. Well, there's a lot of water in wood. So the initial combustion of wood starts to occur at 212 degrees. And we all have a fairly good idea from our movie-going experience throughout our lives. Fahrenheit 451, the Ray Bradbury science fiction about the burning of books. Paper burns at 451.
I didn't know that. Wow.
So wood goes from, you start to boil off the water, and at that point, as the water is boiling, you're getting almost no heat from that fire, no heat, no usable heat. It has to go into the next stage of burning gases, and those gases start to combust above 450 degrees. And 60% of the heat that you get out of your wood stove or your wood fireplace comes from those burning gases that are in that secondary stage of combustion. And then finally, as it starts to get up to around 900 degrees, you're seeing the burning of carbon, charcoal, and that's your final source of heat. But you're now up at about 900 to 1100 degrees Fahrenheit. Well, why is this important, and why am I spending so much time on it? As it turns out, I'm over there looking at these kilns, and I'm going, what were they burning? And people were suggesting they were burning coal. People were suggesting they were burning charcoal. Didn't look like it to me. And then I went, they're burning wood? Well, they were. And as it turns out, how do you take burning wood at 1100 degrees and raise the temperature of that fire hot enough to basically burn limestone and reduce it to powder? Limestone will burn at between 1500 to no more than 1800 degrees Fahrenheit. So these fires, they were twin fires. Anybody remember the name of the antique shop down the road here?
Yeah.
Twin fires. Each one of these kilns over here in Sheffield has 2 fireplaces feeding it. And the size of, now when we burn fires in our fireplaces, we tend to start the fire in, let's pretend my arm is a 16-inch log, we start the fire right here. But in the lime kilns, the fire, they are all oriented so the very tips of those logs are the furthest in. So they start from one end and they burn in that direction. And if you've watched your fire, you'll see how fire races along the log. So if you can orient the number of logs that you have in there and change the ratio of the air to that feed rate, we're now talking about carburation. We're now talking about, automobile engines and all the modern science. So depending on how that wood is and how it's fed in, you can actually boost the temperature of that fire to that needed 1500 to 1800 degrees. Let's try another slide. Okay, now for limestone. This is the most difficult part for me. not only am I not a historian, I'm not a chemist. So at the very top, limestone, as you see at the top, is called calcium carbonate, CaCO3, okay? Doesn't mean anything to me, you know, come on, let's jazz this up a little. Well, it turns out that it's a broad reference. The material called limestone has many other materials in it. So depending on where you mine it and what got deposited in it when it was being formed, you've got things like something called magnesium. What's that doing there? Calcite? What the heck is that? So contained in this are a myriad of different kind of soups that are getting burned. And what happens as they're burned, heat added as we go to the right, and it degrades into calcium oxide plus carbon dioxide. There's a hot topic, isn't it? Carbon dioxide. Whoa. Very much on our minds a lot today related to climate. At that point, that which is you see up there titled as quicklime is what is generally referred to as lime. When a lot of people talk about lime, it's like just lime, but it's not. It's like referring to quicklime as just lime shows that you agree with Gertrude Stein that a rose is a rose is a rose. Lime is not lime is not lime. There are all kinds of different lime. Its chemical properties at that state are remarkable. Why do I say that? Because if you introduce a lot of water, suddenly the exothermic reaction can heat that material to between 200, as much, well, let's say an average of to 200 degrees to 500 degrees Fahrenheit. Wait a minute, we're starting to talk about burning, aren't we? So not only that, the lime powder expands by 2.5 times. And if you introduce that water too fast, it's explosive.
Oh, like
It starts fires. So I just heard a recent, I was talking with someone, a local recently, he said, hey, did you hear about those guys who were storing lime down in one of those buildings down in Canaan? And there was a sudden rainstorm and it overwhelmed their facility and the water got in and it blew the roof off? And I said, no, I hadn't. Yeah, well, I believe it. This stuff is so explosive that one of the things of this quicklime that can be used for is you compress it into a little tiny tube, you drill a hole in a piece of rock, you drop the tube in, and you pour some water in, and it cracks the rock. So it's literally used as kind of a semi-explosive device. That's how potentially dangerous it is. Now, we go from quicklime, which is dry powder sitting there, to what is now known as slake lime. What's slake lime? Well, there are 3 kinds of slake lime. There is dry slaked, and there is wet slaked, and then there's hot lime. Boy, have I gone down a rabbit hole. Dry slake is the very slow addition of water in a very controlled fashion to this powderous substance such that it remains in powder form, but you've lost the explosive nature of it. It's more controllable, okay? Wet slaked turns it into literally a wetter, slimier, more gelatinous form, which they refer to as lime putty. Lime putty, what's the application there? Lime putty, very easily, lime paint, lime mortar. So, and then hot lime is when you're mixing up cement. And apparently the Romans liked to use unslaked They like to use the raw lime in the combination with their other additives for their concrete to create what became, the Romans lived in what is now referred to as the concrete revolution. And so they were capable of building underwater structures, or structures that were piers that went into the water, and 2,000 years later, those structures are still standing without degradation. So the final part of this is that if you leave lime alone, it will gradually reabsorb the CO2, carbon dioxide, that originally was burnt away from it and turned back to limestone. Boy, maybe I should run a piece of like the Lion King here and start singing about the circle of life. But okay, let's go to now the next one. And this is the next thing. I'm away from the kind of dry high school history or whatever, high school chemistry or beginning of high school chemistry, to what lime is in. And what it is in is absolutely, for me, mind-bending. You use lime to harden up the shells of chicken eggs. You feed chickens lime. It's used to filter water, orange juice, baby food. It's used as leavening. And it's used in asphalt. It's used in another form. It's used when you see all these furnaces putting out sulfurous gases and polluting everything. Lime is used as a desulfuring compound inside the chimney stacks to capture sulfur. It's just, and it just goes on and on and on. And so lime is in toothpaste. Lime is used to help make paper. So every day, without us knowing it, lime is a part of our lives. Question?
Quick question.
Speak up.
The lime that we use on grass, what does that do?
The lime in the ground?
Yeah, you know, you can buy a thing of lime and you put it on your lawn.
Oh, yeah, agricultural, one of the favored uses of lime is for agricultural purposes.
And what does that do to the ground?
It changes, agricultural lime is one of the largest uses of lime here. And when I interviewed Art Pataki, the old man, before he passed away, he said, the ground around here, it just was awful for producing any kind of crop. You had to add lime to it to change the alkalinity of the soil and the consistency of the soil so you could have any kind of decent crop output. So, yeah, did I answer your question?
Yeah.
Wonderful. So if you just look at that and kind of roll your eyes around and just get a sense, I don't particularly like the organization of it because it's almost overwhelming, at least for my poor mind. But you do begin to get an idea of just, it's also used in plastic. My son-in-law works at a plastics manufacturing facility. And he said, yeah, plastic. You know all that white plastic sheet? What do you think's in it for filler? Lime. Because it's relatively inexpensive and there is a plenitude of it. All right. So I said before that I wasn't a historian, and thank goodness that the Historical Commission went to Beth and Lynn Wood to make this book so that there was something that was intelligent that was related to this wreck of a lime kiln that's over there on Lime Kiln Road. You go over to Lime Kiln Road, you see a bunch of bushes, you see a bunch of bricks sitting there, and you go, yeah, what else you got? When that lime kiln stood, it would have been breathtaking to this day, And what was there would have been breathtaking to this day. So I want to kind of, as best I can without turning this into, again, a high school history class, go through a little bit of that trail of how these lime kilns came into being. Please. So there's good old Chester Goodale. He dies in 1984. The Goodale Quarry, which was then known for, it was known fairly well, I don't know just throughout, just how much of America I do not know, but it had an excellent reputation. And so he died in 84. The mine went dead from 84 until 1897, when a gentleman here, a Mr. Merrill, went and he kind of perused what the Goodale lime was, and he raved about it. He was connected to the U.S. Natural History organization, and he was an author of a book about stones of America, and he was, he had enough background so that he counted for something when he said something. So what you might want to notice here, he calls it what's known as life. It's white, very white, it never tires the eye. Okay, time out. I'm looking at this and I'm going, I don't understand this. Why would he be so crazy about this? The type of lime that he is describing from this quarry is actually all calcite, or calcite in the majority. What's calcite? Well, calcite's very white, and as it turns out, just to give you a little bit of information about calcite, its claim to fame is actually its degree of transparency or translucency, and in some calcite is transparent. So transparent that it was used by the Vikings as a means to navigate when the sky was cloudy, because the way that light goes through it bifracts it. It then was used in World War II to make bomb sights. That was the optical uses. Okay, limestone in bomb sights. All right? So so there you go. It's pretty much, there's a company that comes in from the Midwest that now buys the Goodale Quarry, 1897. You can see Professor Merrill's comments there. Quite the rave review. Certainly, if I were going to cough up what was then a large amount of money to go buy some lime kiln several states away, I would like to have a good housekeeping seal of approval such as that. Okay? Now, I want to jump off of that for a second, and there's a reason why that is there. Also in 1897, and I found this, and it was an incredible find, the Chatham Gazette. What is a guy from Chatham doing over in what is Canaan, New York? Well, he's going through what was then the Barnes and Son, Charles Barnes and Son Quarry. 3 lime kilns, producing something like 130 barrels of lime per week. And the reporter, my mother was a reporter for 45 years, so I really appreciate this particular reporter and his specificity. He talks about the quarryman, he talks about the burner man, he talks about the shape of the kiln, the size of the kiln, so on and so forth. And as it turns out, I didn't find this until quite recently, he is describing almost to a T what ended up being built in Sheffield by two men who also happened to be named Barnes. Next. So again, let's go to the question of wood. It's hard for me to see that. Maybe can you all see that? No.
It's tough to see.
Yeah. Okay. So there are 3 kilns. They're operating 24/7. I think that's a point that I have yet to have brought up. This is what's called a continuous burning shaft kiln. It has a big tall shaft. The lime's burnt down in the bottom and it falls through, and the fires are down below. They're covered in iron. Now, when you're going to invest all that money in brick, you want to protect that. So all these shafts are covered in a skin of steel. So I want to go to, on this picture, intense heat, well, we know that. Oh yes, down in 1897, there are 2,000 cords of wood on hand, 2,000 cords. At my home, I'm lucky if I burn 2 cord a year. We'll get to how many cord one of these things burns, but 2,000 cords, and they've got 8,000 more cords on order. He lists the income of the lime burner himself, $12 per week. The coopers get $12 to $15 a piece, depending on how many barrels they make. And then there are the hired hands who are splitting the stone, loading the stone, taking the barrels, putting them on the cars to go off on the railroad. And where is it? Oh yes, wages for other employees are about $1.50 per day. So the big boys at the lime kiln were the cooper and the man who judged the burning. I think, oh yes, yearly output of about 4,000 barrels, wholesale price is $1 each. There's a high season for producing the lime, starting at August 1st and going into late fall. That's the high season for making lime. So finding that finally gave me a clue as to what the lime kilns were and how they came about in Sheffield. Let's continue. One of the first pictures in the book is a picture of a garage, in Great Barrington, and M.A. Barnes, proprietor. That's Marcus Barnes, one of 2 brothers. The reason that picture's in there is that this is the very, very start of automobile sales in America, probably around 1906, 1908, right around there. Marcus Barnes is running this garage. If you want to know what kind of cars those are probably Rio. And anybody who was anywhere near having longer hair and a fuller head of hair back in the 60s probably remembers REO Speedwagon.
Oh.
That was all. A little bit of trivia you tossed in here, you know. So that's the first picture, but what makes this so interesting was in this treatise provided is there's no timeline that correlates the creation of these lime kilns with this garage. Now let's go to the next page. Okay. There's a relatively, I think this is a 1905 map, and dead center with that blue arrow, you can see the location of the lime kiln. What's also worth while noting is if you look about 6 inches to the right, you'll see school. That schoolhouse in that corner was there before 1884. And it was there throughout this time. And during the entire time of the kiln, it was the schoolhouse for all the children in the neighborhood. So that's kind of fun. And then the Gooddale Quarry, and this is the next question that I had. This Gooddale Quarry has this pure calcite lime, good for foundations and cutting and maybe even sculpting. Why would they want to burn this stuff? And it wasn't until over a year and a half later, actually going onto the site, getting permission to go onto the site and walk the site of the Gooddale Quarry, that I actually learned that there are 2 quarries there. One, the quarry, which is a big hole in the ground now filled with water, was for that calcitic marble. The other quarry, when you walk back to it, 200-300 yards away, is basically you walk up to what was once a mountain that has now been cleft in 2. There's this huge gap of 100 yards, and that's where all the lime was mined for multiple decades, 50, 60, 70 years. A lot of lime came out of there. And there's hardly any on the ground now. It's just remarkable. But I didn't know that. So I had to figure that out as well. It's like, oh, so all the refuse marble that was used for the burning came from the second site in the Gooddale Quarry. There's one quick thing. There's also a tunnel at the end of that second quarry. And I didn't walk it, but a couple of the folks that were with me did. And it's a tunnel in the middle of nowhere that goes nowhere. I still have yet to figure out why it was tunneled, but I did read about, in another quarry in another part of the state, how they used the tunneling procedure as a means to start caving in the walls around them and above them. Next picture, please. Okay, here we are. This is the only way we know what's going on here. 1903, April 1903. Construction of a lime kiln begins. The owners are Marcus and Albert Barnes. They are constructing a kiln, and they just starting April 3rd, and they expect to be running this kiln by the middle of June. Now, most of us who have had anything to do with putting an addition on our house or putting up a house go, what? If you've had a house put up that took you only 2 or 3 months at most, boy, oh boy, you had some really, really great contractors. These guys are not only putting up the kiln, which is 45 feet high. It has what is called a draw tunnel in front of it. That's another 8 feet down. It also has in front of that 45 feet of poured cement floor. It is going to, all that brick, and there are 2 kinds of brick in it. One is fire brick in the lining, and the other is regular brick. You can see it over there. And they're putting a bridge from the hill that's just behind the lime kiln. They're putting it so it comes straight over to the very top of the lime kiln so that the lime ore or the broken limestones can be dumped into the kiln at the very top. So there's a wooden trestle there. All this in 2 months. Now, and here's where it gets even funnier. I finally found out the age of these 2 boys. 25 and 23.
Holy moly.
And this started in June. Marcus Barnes, who I mentioned is the owner of that garage, the younger of the 2, had just graduated from Williams College in June of '02. What? And he didn't graduate with an engineering degree, he graduated with a sociology degree. So how did they possess or come into possession of such extraordinary understanding of all the facets of lime kiln building, and then also the ability to hire all the appropriate contractors and put them all to work and have this thing up and going 9 months after Marcus graduates from college. So bells are going off in my head, and that's when I finally traced it back to the fact that the Barnes Kiln down in Canaan, the man who ran that was their father. So they had all the connections in place. They had all the rapport that comes from a reputation that had taken 30 to 40 years to establish in the lime community throughout all of Connecticut, as it turns out, because the Barnes lime product was prized. And bam, 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 they're up and running. These young men, and look at the amount of, they're talking about buying 40,000, not 4,000, not 8,000, not 2,000, 40,000 cord of wood. Okay? I looked at that and I went, that's got to be a misprint. And I finally figured out today why it may not have been. But in the meantime, let me give you an idea of what 40,000 cords of cordwood represents. From here to Pittsfield, it's 27 miles. You could take those cords of wood and string them end to end to end, and you would line Route 7 from here to Pittsfield on one side of the street and back again, and still have 6 miles left.
Go back to Canaan.
That's a phenomenal, phenomenal amount of cordwood. So that number has just been for me. The other thing that's interesting, now again, 23, 25, they already have all this stuff that they're learning from dad. They also probably have some financial backing. But look at the amount of stone that they're buying. 200,000 tons of limestone. So they're talking, at that time, the expense for that, if they bought all 200,000 tons, is $50,000. Dudes, where are you coming up with the bucks? Who's the daddy warbucks in the background? Because you ain't earned it yet. So they've got these connections that they're relying on. They must have. Don't know. But interesting that these two men with, I mean, talk about that good old word, chutzpah, in just droves of that stuff. So the bridge will be built to the bank extending above the kiln? Yes, okay. Now, in the meantime, the Chester Goodale Quarry, who they are going to be getting the stone from, and is run by people who are out in the Midwest, is going to build, they've purchased 500 acres of land, which goes from the lime kilns all the way down to basically Route 7. The Shalley Crossing was named after a homeowner who was right next to the railroad tracks. And will put in siding. And they are considering a matter of putting a broad gauge track to the quarry. Okay. In partnership with the new lime company. Next, please. Okay. So when you follow the chain of title, and you see the chain of title, April 1903, Albert and Marcus Barnes. Then in 04, just about a year later, April of 04, they changed their name. Incorporate. Okay, now you start to see the whole revolution of incorporation and business practices and shell companies, and that whole thing starts to revolve as a slurry in your mind about what goes on in modern day business. What becomes interesting here, to me, is that the company is going to lay a mile of track for an electric road. An electric road. So that roadway is going, it's not going to be gasoline powered, it's going to be powered by electric. Think trolley. okay? That road goes from, when you saw the map there, it goes from the quarry just past the front of what will be the Lime Kiln building, and then goes kind of northeast a little bit before it curves down at the edge of a field and goes all the way down to the train tracks right through what is now Milky's junkyard. So that's how the lime is going to get to being burnt and then get to the train tracks. And any stone that they want to sell will also use that same track. They talk about gasoline power to create the electricity. Yeah, okay. So my thinking was, well, okay, that we know that there are several different kinds of railroad track. Is it standard gauge, like most railroads are in America, or is it narrow gauge? Most likely it was narrow gauge. What's the difference between the two? Standard gauge is 4'8". Narrow gauge is 3 feet.
Mike, was that the track that was known as the trolley?
You have to speak up for the deaf guy.
Was that the track that was also the trolley?
That was what?
Was that also the trolley?
Yes.
Because that's the largest,
Yeah.
longest trolley.
So that probably, I don't know what the date of the trolley was, but
About the time, that time.
so, so there were scales to put in by the Goodale Company to weigh the stone. And they also, the Goodale Company, built a building right at what is now Milky's for the storage of product there. And at one point, there was also a cooperage down there. Next, please. Now, I'm trying to go as fast as I can, so people don't necessarily fall asleep on me.
What's a cooperage? You just told me. Barrels, making barrels?
Pardon me?
Is a cooperage something to make?
Yes, coopers make barrels.
Oh, okay.
Apparently in 1904, they are as kind of aggressive as they were when they first started. They continued with this aggressive approach to this. They must have had visions of all kinds of things in their heads. What you see now is that they're going to start a pressed brick business as well. And Marcus's older brother, Albert, will be named as the president. This is December of '04. And this brick company will commence operation within a few months. And the output will be 20,000 bricks a day. Whew. They are going for it, hell-bent for leather. And then what happens? December of 1904. Let's go to the next slide. Read number 3. The Albert and Marcus Barnes Lime Company Incorporated sells to the Berkshire Hills Company, April of 1905. 2 years. Albert and Marcus Barnes are washed up. And they sell to a couple that's coming up out of New York who decide to move up here.
What a surprise.
They bring in, and one thing that's notable, because you'll see a picture of him, is they bring in a man who ran a stoneware company on the eastern end of Boston to basically run this place. This man is 56 when he is brought in to run the place, and there's a notice in the paper that he finally gets married when he's 60 for the first time. I'm having fun. So this chain of title, that is significant because you now have a whole different organization running this. And I've been having a hard time because although in the treatise here, it says that there are particular owners and is named, there's also a representation in Yonkers, New York, of this same company, but with entirely different names. So, oh, what is going on here? So there is representation in New York City. There are magazines at that time, as there are today, dedicated to the different professions. One is called Stone Magazine. There's another architectural magazine, and they stay abreast of all the goings on throughout the country. So that's where, when you get away from the Berkshire Eagle and the local newspapers, then you'll see these notices in Stone Magazine, for example. So next, please. Okay. So there it is, up on your second down from the top is the Berkshire Hills Company, high grade, wood burned. Well, as it turns out, the barn's father, gasoline was being found in Pennsylvania early on, late 1800s. He started experimenting with injecting fuel into his fires to see if that was going to change probably the economics of producing burnt lime. They backed off of it. So burnt lime, it's kind of like wood-fired pizza now. If you go into a pizza store and you go, oh, wood-fired? Oh yeah, I want my pizza wood-fired. There's that same kind of selectivity and appreciation of the finer things in life when you buy lime prepped with a wood fire. So in the center, now what's happening here is that the Berkshire Hills Lime Company has also, in 1905, that company which bought Barnes's out also bought out the remainder of Chester Goodale white marble. And that ad in the center is all about the wonderfulness of Chester Goodale marble, national reputation, wonderful for carving, yada yada yada. Now, one little thing that I will mention here as a kind of quick reference to what I'm doing tomorrow. Underneath Berkshire Hills Lime Company is the Massachusetts Lime Company. And that refers to the lime kiln that's down on Silver Street. That lime company, in its entirety, only existed for 4 years, from 1909 to 1912, which kind of tells you the age of this ad. So it's somewhere between 1909 and 1912 for this ad. Next, please. There is an absolute paucity of photographs of the lime kilns on Lime Rock Road, the Barnes Kilns, as I like to call them. This is one of only 2 photographs of the actual facility itself, and it is entirely confusing. In the paper that talked about the old Barnes kiln in Canaan, they talked about 20 men operating 3 kilns. There are 19 men here, and they are operating 4. Okay? Now, you look at it and you say, well, there's not much available here. The guy on the right, leaning against the pole, that's the secretary-treasurer. That's our 56-year-old man who used to deal in stoneware and got married at 60, Mr. Wright. And there's one of Art Bataki's relatives up above, way in the back, with a low hat on. He's the shortest guy up above and way in the back. And I believe that that's his father.
It's his father.
Was his father?
It's his father.
Yes, I got it.
And that's Art Bataki's daughter.
Oh, what did you do with all the photographs that Art had? I want them. He said to me, I used to have a load of photographs, but I don't know where they went to. So anyway, now here's what makes this so confusing. This is a picture of the 196-foot long barn that covered all the lime as it was being refined. And it is a picture of an electric train. And the delineation of the two, you can see that 1, 2, 3, 4, there are 4 men in front of that tram, whatever you want to call it. The reason that and you can see the horizontal line underneath, that are the train tracks. And up above on the roof of this tram, you can see a pole that goes off to the left out of picture. That is the cable connector to the electricity. And I look at that and I go, doesn't look like a railroad train to me. And then I thought about it a little bit more and I'm going, well, what do you have to do every day, no matter whether it's raining or snowing, if it's 24/7 operation? You've got to run dynamite up to the site. You've got to run tools up to the site. You've got to run possibly spare clothing, and possibly even by virtue of its size, a place, should it rain or get the weather get too bad, there's a place for them to take refuge. So it basically looks like a modern day, an older version of a modern day tiny house on wheels.
And what was the location of that, the precise location?
The location?
Yeah.
Okay, I realize I haven't provided entirely what this kiln setup is like. The entire kiln, there is a wall in front of it that's about 8 feet high. And there are 5 vertical shafts that once existed at regular intervals along that wall. There are draw tunnels, which look like openings, for the extraction of the burnt lime. And out in front of that wall, 45 feet out in front of that wall, for the entire duration of that 196 feet, is a cement floor. So what this is these are the train tracks that rode right next to the building itself, because once the lime was put into barrels, Art Pataki talked about a 16-foot long flat railroad car. The barrels would be put on that, and then they would be escorted down to the building that was alongside the railroad tracks at what is now Milky's.
So
And-
it's parallel to what is now Lime Kiln Road.
Perpendicular. The lime kilns are almost perpendicular to Lime Kiln Road.
Okay.
Because when you look at that hill, they were using the hill to their advantage. And the advantage was that they got to have the bridge that came over to feed all these kilns way up high. Now, the other telling thing, the other thing that I've had a fun time with is, what are the duties of these various guys? Look at the men with the white on their shoes. These are the guys that are on that flat floor raking the overburnt, underburnt lime, slag, whatever impurities, and sorting the lime, and then shoveling up the lime into the barrels. Then taking the barrels, and so there's lime dust that, if you've been in a wood shop, or any kind of dirty interior, there's dust down here. And so look at their shoes. You can tell who's working the floor, quote unquote. The next thing to tell is, look at the men who have aprons on. You see them over on the left? You see that at least the 2 people on the left have aprons, but they don't have lime on their shoes. These are probably your coopers. Notice what time of year it is. It looks like it's somewhere, anywhere in the fair part of the season, right? Look at the number of guys with short sleeves on, and then look at the guys with long sleeves on. Your quarrymen are the guys who are swinging the big monster. This is a 14-pound, it's not a sledgehammer, it's a stone sledgehammer, designated as such because of the pointed end. I can't imagine swinging this thing at 14 pounds all day long to split stone. Those men did. Now, and another thing about this, because of what lime is It's highly caustic. It was actually used, it was some of the first forms of chemical warfare. And if it gets onto anything wet, remember that it explodes, it expands, and it heats up, gives off exothermic reaction. It also has silica in it. What's silicosis? So, again, my son-in-law, a chemist by training, said that any men who worked on the floor raking this stuff and picking it up and putting it in barrels, within 2 weeks, they had decreased lung capacity. So, and can you imagine they're burning? So now, as you look at these guys, the guys with the white on their shoes, do you see any like kerchiefs around their necks that they might put up over their faces? No. These are, you know, back when men were men type men and didn't care and they died young. So from their apparel, you start to be able to delineate what the different men were doing. Now, let me jump. For the quarrymen, it's important to note, in order to have proper air conduction through this 35-foot tall chimney loaded with limestone, those limestones had to be a certain size, so as they lay against one another, air could get by them. They all had to be split to headstones. This is Art Pataki. They were split to headstones the size of a human head. So the dynamite goes off, the stone blows up, it's littered all over the field, and now it's your job to wander out into the field and pick the appropriate stone that's of the right color, so on and so forth, and then go bam to reduce it to a proper size, pick it up, and put it in the cart that is then going to be carted to the lime kilns. All day long. And they weren't prisoners. Wow. Okay, next photo. Something I learned as a result of this investigation. Insurance companies, in order to issue insurance certificates, created maps of what exactly they were insuring. These are the so-called Sanborn insurance maps. The time of this is 1912, Berkshire Hills Company. You see that there are only 4 kilns there. The 5th one will be added probably in the next 3 years after this. Okay? But over to the left of the main building, now you see that big area out in front? That's where the hot lime is brought out of the kiln, spread out onto the floor, sifted, graded, and put into barrels before being put onto the train that runs right up against the front or the lower, on this photograph or picture, on that lower line, that lower horizontal line. There's also on the left, there's a cooperage. Now, if you're talking about 70 barrels or 100 barrels of lime per week, that's a lot of barrels that you have to put together. So many that all these lime companies no longer made their own barrels from scratch. They shipped in staves that were pre-bent. So what I didn't get to on that Gazette article about the old Barnes kiln down in Canaan was that they had just purchased enough staves for 30,000 barrels. So can you imagine filling up this room with staves, then having to assemble them with iron hoops, which those iron hoops in those days, they weren't screwed together, they were riveted. Those rivets were hot.
What kind of wood?
Well, usually oak, just like bourbon and other nice materials. The additional...
With iron rings holding it.
There's an example.
Okay.
That's a small barrel. The other thing that occurred to me is that because this is unslaked lime, this is quick lime, and it is so reactive to water, they have to be waterproof. Ooh, wow.
What happens if water hits them?
So, what's that?
What happens when water hits the lime?
Well, depending on how much water hits it, how fast it can be explosive.
Oh,
Art Pataki, just to give you an idea, Art Pataki told a story of one farmer who came to pick up the quick lime at these kilns, and take it home, and on the way home, his wagon caught fire. So, interesting. Okay, so that's a Sanborn map that shows us, there's also over on the right, there's a building for Mr. Wright to live in and do all his arithmetic. And there's another engine building, because by this time they've jumped out of the electric tram into gasoline powered. And they have a couple of engines, small engines. Next, please. Oops, oh, it's that time.
It is that time.
Okay, before we start, I told you that I couldn't hire Ken Burns, and I couldn't hire, any movie star of any repute to do this movie or to do the voiceover. Didn't have the budget for that. Couldn't hire a known cameraman, so it was like fly by the seat of our pants, take some video shots and try to assemble something with the idea that it might be used to help drum up interest and potential funding. So I apologize from the get-go for the very annoying voice that will be talking throughout most of this, and I hope that you'll get the gist of where it was going. The lime kilns in Sheffield were in operation from the 1870s to 1930. During that time, the population of the United States grew threefold, from 40 million to 120 million people. This created an enormous demand for raw materials needed in the fabrication of housing and transportation. Mostly unseen among the more visible materials, such as wood, brick, and stone, was lime. Although lime had been used to augment crop production yields for centuries, burned limestone became a central ingredient in the manufacturing of vast amounts of mortar, plaster, paint, and surprisingly steel. At full production, the 5 kilns produced 75 to 100 barrels of lime a week. These barrels were distributed to various New England destinations, including the New York City area. The burning of limestone was accomplished by burning wood in large quantities. So-called cordwood, cut in 4-foot lengths and stacked 4 feet high, would have created 4 to 5 separate piles, each of which would have stretched to 300 feet in length. The start of every day at the lime kilns required a man to come out from his house across the street, cross over to this barn, and to put a harness on his horse, hook up the cart to it, and then go out into what was a field of wood and start loading wood into that cart that would be brought up and deposited behind the 5 lime kilns.
The house was owned by the Doe, worked at the lime kiln, and the father did, and hauled all the wood to each hill from these piles on the field here. He done that every day.
I'm told not only was the wood cut to cord length and in quite sizable piles, but there were also woodcutters who were processing wood in longer length, down to that cordwood length wood. We're further along the cart path, getting closer to the kilns right here. And you might see a little bit as they're stretched out over the entire 200 feet. The kiln that is still standing at full height is on the furthest right.
Taking the horse every day, bringing a 4-foot wood with a 2-wheel cart. They'd load the wood down there and bring it up here and put it to each kiln.
That cart full of wood would have been drawn around and up this little path behind the kilns where the wood would be distributed to each of the kilns. And we're standing alongside the what is called the draw tunnel wall that fronts all 5 of these kilns. That is, as you see, just about 8 feet high at this point and runs a full 196 feet in this direction. The other thing that is kind of interesting to note here is the formality of the stone that has been cut for the foundation at this point. This has a formality to it that we've seen in various cities that we've visited throughout throughout our lives, where courthouses exist, and government buildings have been erected with the idea that they would stand for centuries. Next important facet of this whole lime kiln operation, which at this point is much harder to see, but very much equally of importance, is that once the very hot product was pulled out of the draw tunnels, it had to be pulled out onto a flat surface where it could be cooled, sifted, and then processed into barrel. The furthest part of that perimeter out there, so you get an idea of just how big this platform was, it stretches a full 45 feet away from the draw tunnel wall, and again, is the full 196-foot long length of these draw tunnel walls. So it's quite an enormous platform. Underneath my feet right now, you can see the stone that was laid for that perimeter of that platform, and it comes all the way out to here, and then it stretches that full 196 feet down. I've seen previous lime kilns where this entire area would have been covered with a roof. We have yet to determine whether that was the case here. So far, I've only seen small, in pictures, I've only seen small outbuildings that by no means covered that full distance. So this is part of the uncovering of the history of this entire structure. This is the fifth of the lime kilns built after the turn of the 1900s, and the one that is still obviously standing in its entirety. You can see up top is the metal skin that once covered the kiln in its entirety and is now degraded. That skin served two purposes, not only to protect the brick understructure from the elements, but it also became an attachment point for a wooden trussing, which brought small, narrow gauge cars of the limestone over to the very top of the mouth of the kiln up there. Was it a turntable?
Yeah, that's right. Had a turntable for each car that up at the lime kiln. They would turn the car around and they would push it over to the lime kiln and dump it into the truck deliver and dump it into the kiln.
It was then distributed into the kiln. And this entire kiln would have been filled with those limestone rock. What we have here is basically, I have taken that one entire tree that I cut up in 4-foot lengths, 10 pieces, and I have put them in the feeds where the fire was being burned in the lime kilns. And you can see that that doesn't even fill half of what these circular cylinders contain. Now, important to remember here, this is full scale in terms of the width. That chimney overhead, 10 feet wide, 30 feet tall, is stuffed to the brim with limestone. So all this heat from this fire is going up into that limestone and traveling around all those stones and heating them up so that they eventually fall apart and drop the lime back down through this hole.
They didn't have nothing to cut the stone out. The men had to break up the stone. They blasted it out and big pieces of that, break up the pieces of, throw it in the car and bring it down here and to lime kilns.
Usually, in order to enhance air movement through them, they would be no bigger than the size of a human headstones.
A stone was dissolved into lime, and they had a draw on the bottom, would draw out the lime, and put it on, dump it on the floor, and then screen it, and put it in barrels, and ship it down to the railroad.
So the finished burnt lime would fall down through that draw tunnel, where it would be collected and brought out onto this large platform that exists out here, so that it could be cooled, processed, raked, put into barrels, and then shipped down to a storage facility in an old big barn close to the railroad tracks. We've come around from the lower processing platform where we're looking at the draw tunnel holes to the upper side where the kilns stand on top of. those draw tunnel holes, and we're looking at right now one entrance on one side of the kiln. This would have been where the doors would have been on the kiln that would have been raised and lowered for feeding the wood in. That capping up there, when it's looked at, you can see that there are additional pieces of metal put into it, probably to hold some form of walking structure up there so that the stone could be distributed up on high, as well as points of attachment for a wooden trestle that allowed those ore carts, or the limestone carts, to be brought over at that height so that the limestone could be distributed into the kiln, all being fed simultaneously. 5 kilns. That's a lot of fires, a lot of wood being consumed in the process. And we must remember that these kilns were being fired 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The lime also had to be protected from a sudden invasion of unwanted water, because the thermal reactions could actually end up being quite explosive.
One guy came up here and got a load of lime one time, and he got down to the railroad and his flag burned up.
And in that regard, dangerous, and would also, at that point, ruin how the product was edited for use further on down the line chain.
They had a building a little bit further north to house the engine. They had 2 engines. One would break down maybe and have another one. They had one truck car to haul the lime down to the railroad in the barrels and put them on the railroad. But they had the V-shaped cars that would haul the stone to the lime kiln. They had the track going right through the building. Would bring the car in there when they were through with it and be in there overnight and take it back out the next morning and go out.
Let's go next. I'd just like to finish up with a timeline. Lime has been part and parcel of, as we're seeing, it's been part and parcel of the cultures of 3 different civilizations. And its evolution here in America is very interesting because it undergoes some very rapid changes starting in the 20th century. So, okay. When the lime is dumped out of the kiln, it fell into these kinds of barrows. And you'll notice the very, very specific shape, big wheel, and the center of gravity of the wheelbarrow portion of it is so low that if something heavy drops into it, it doesn't turn over. They also had a detachable handle because you didn't want to be standing there or try to grip that handle when burning hot lime had just coated it. So you came up with the handle, you inserted it into the barrow, you brought it out, and then you dumped that lime. And you didn't have to dump it far. If you look at that, that mouth goes all the way down to the floor. So that was a wonderful find. And I tried to buy it, and the owner wouldn't accept $250 from me for it. So anyway. Just quickly, this is when I talked about fire brick and regular brick. Obviously, temperatures of 1,500 to 1,800 degrees require a special formulation of brick. This came from the fire brick on the lower right, came from the Kreischer Company down on Staten Island. And if you care to investigate that, that is a story unto itself. This organization, like Kreischer, founded by 2 brothers, became so successful that they went bankrupt. But then was taken over by one of the employees and grew to the size of 300 people. It was so big that they ended up making a special town to house the employees, which goes into the whole labor movement of the late 1800s, which goes into, how we treat people in this day and age. It goes to that kind of movement. Anyway, let's move on. Following this, the Berkshire Hills Company basically sells out in 1930. I wonder why. Let's see, 1930. Do you think there was a decrease in the need for lime mortar related to building new buildings? I wonder. So obviously what happened with lime production and the call for building materials is it went during the Great Depression. So they sell out, but they sell out to, and this is the next piece of interesting news, is they sell out in 1930 to the United States Gypsum Company. When you go into the store to buy finishing materials for the interior of your house today, you will see USG. That's the same company. And they went big, they went hard, they went fast, and possibly they indulged in not only venture capitalism, but disaster capitalism, if you know what that is. But they're also, it says gypsum. Gypsum is an entirely different substance than lime. And what is starting to happen is that the whole business of refining limestone to lime products is becoming so expensive that they're starting to, and the fuel costs are becoming so great that they're now trying to create other alternatives. And by the way, during that time, two things happened. 1915, sheetrock is created. Whoa. What's in it? Gypsum. U.S. Gypsum Company, taking over a market. 1916, as they are shipping lime, there are so many different sized barrels, there's no continuity. Remind you of something going on in modern day electronic America? It is brought to the attention of the Congress, and for two separate sessions of Congress in 2016, they debate the subject of the size of lime barrels, finally passing what is still to this day known as the lime barrel law. Lime can only be distributed in two size barrels. One contains a net weight of 180 pounds. The bigger one contains a net weight of 280 pounds. This barrel over here, this small barrel, comes fairly close, but just misses what 180 pounds of lime would look like contained in a barrel. The bigger barrel is darn closer to what we know as the 50-gallon barrel. 300 pounds. Now, the weight of that barrel alone is 45 pounds. Can you imagine one that's this big and this tall? We're talking, these units are over 300 pounds and you've got to move them on a concrete floor. Two guys in a big honking hand truck. Okay, so we go from there. The gypsum company gets into some trouble with the law. And also, what happens is that kind of World War II comes along. And so they decide to get rid of what is actually not an opponent, but a competitor of gypsum, lime, and they let go of the lime company. And so from there, it goes, basically in 43, it goes into private hands. Now, everybody in here had parents that were alive during World War II, right? Did any of them ever talk about the drive to find scrap metal to help supply the war effort of World War II? Okay. Art Pataki related to what happened to those lime kilns. Oh, there's one other thing. Forgive me, I have to back up one more time. U.S. Gypsum buys the lime kilns in 1930. In 1932, they shut the lime kilns down because they have created, down where Milky's is, what is called a rotary lime kiln. And that's a new method for refining lime that turns out to be not that much less energy intensive. But what it looks like is take a big rolling pin, huge rolling pin of steel, tilted at an angle. You introduce the lime up at this end and it's rolling. This whole big thing is rolling. And the lime travels on a kind of a style of an Archimedes wheel, Archimedes screw principle, and it is heated. And this steel structure is got refractory material in it, and by the time it gets down to the other end, so now they don't have to build the big tall towers, and they can choose other heating materials, gas, gasoline, and so they're playing with that. So everybody who worked at the lime kilns, Art Pataki's father and his 2 uncles on his mother's side, go down to work at the new lime kilns down by the railroad tracks. That's 1932. So we go back up to the World War II, and it falls into private hands. What is the war calling for? Scrap iron, scrap steel. Look at all that stuff. There's a lot of metal involved in these lime kilns. You've got the iron skin around 5 of those kilns. You've got the iron that is incorporated into the wooden trestles. You've got the railroad track. I mean, we're ripping this up and we're taking it and we're recycling it. So basically, the whole recycling business plays the next big part of this thing disappearing as we know it today. So, and finally, in 1991, it falls under the auspices of the National Park Service. So, there you have it.
You are president.
Thank you, folks.